chapter 2. So chapter 2 is more like chapter 2 contains stuff like all these incidents response, business continuity planning, and other related stuff like that. So that's what we are going to be doing. Alright, so that's what we are going to be doing. I'm trying to hide this guy. Alright, so our topic for today is understanding incident response. So in cybersecurity, incident response is actually very important. Okay, it's one of the most important aspects of cybersecurity because it's just like our normal day activities, just like the conventional activities. There are a whole lot of things that you really don't have. Even though you must have put a whole lot of controls in place, you might have put a whole lot of control in place, but incident are still bound to happen. Attack are still bound to happen, or it may not necessarily be an attack. So that's why we are calling it incident. So we'll get to where we are going to define the terms, and then we get to understand what an incident means in the cybersecurity context. But the point is that it will happen. It's just like road users, whereby you must have been, when you are learning in your driving school, you must have been taught the safety rule, how to avoid accident and stuff like that. But accident can still happen on the road, yeah. So whenever it happens, what do you do? Are you going to panic? Are you going to run away? Or are you going to call maybe road safety to come and assist? So that's what incident response is all about. So when something happens, either an attack or any type of event that happen that can lead to disruption in service that the organization is offering, so what do you do? So that's what incident response is all about. So, and our objective for this particular class is to understand the terms and components that are associated with incident response. So we'll just go straight into it. So so this is just like an introduction I have here. So saying, while security professionals strive to protect systems from malicious attack or human carelessness, despite this effort, things go wrong. So just like I explained previously, things go wrong. Anything can still happen. So incident responders are like they are like the first responder on the internet or on cybersecurity. Just like although we know our system is not that efficient, but we get to see it. Maybe for those that have been able to travel out of the country or from the foreign movies we watch, and there's an accident or when something happens, and there's an accident, the first thing people usually do is that they call 911. Then 10 minutes or 5 minutes, ambulance will arrive, and then we see some people giving first aid treatment to those people before transporting them to the hospital. So the same thing happens in cybersecurity. When an event occur or when an incident occur, okay, there are people that will first respond to it. They will check it, they will analyze it and see if it's something they can solve by themselves. They will solve it, and if it's something they are unable to solve, then they escalate it to the other member of the team to resolve. But incident responders are actually the first responder. They are the one that are expected to discover this incident, analyze it, and then report it to the other team. So we'll just look at the terminologies so that when we are talking about them, we get to understand. So the first one we're going to look at is breach. So what is breach? If they say your network has been breached or your database has been breached in cybersecurity, so it means the loss of control or a compromise or an unauthorized disclosure or unauthorized acquisition or any similar occurrence where a person other than an authorized user access or potentially access personal identifiable information, or an authorized user access identifiable information for other than an unauthorized purpose, on an authorized purpose. So I'll just explain what this breach means. So breach means that normally we understand that from our very first class or the first two classes, we deal with some terms: authorization, confidentiality, and stuff like that. So this is where these are going to be important. So if you have a data in your organization, let's say a bank or an hospital, for example, you have people's data that you have in your database, right? So anytime those data that you are keeping is exposed, maybe due to a mistake or due to a misconfiguration or maybe due to an attack, anything that lead to it to be compromised, whereby people that are not supposed to have access to that information, okay, now have access to it. Okay, so that means you have been breached. So that means the information has been disclosed to people that are not supposed to have access to it, people that are not authorized. And breach is usually used for when personal. Okay, sorry, let me pick my pen. Okay, sorry, let me use the laser. I think the laser is a bit bigger. So breach is usually used when personal identifiable information are disclosed, right? When personal identifiable information are disclosed in an unauthorized manner. Okay, in an unauthorized manner. So this is very important. So whenever someone that is not supposed to have access to a personal identifiable information have access to it, then that means that's a breach. So for example, let's use NIMC for example. We know NIMC holds our national database where our NIN is, right? So we all have our personal information with them. If it occurs that there is a breach on NIMC database, and then someone is able to hack them and download all this information and then maybe sell it on the dark web or they upload it wherever, so we'll say that NIMC has been breached. Okay, so that's just a typical example that we can all relate. Or maybe if our bank is breached and then someone upload all our names, our address, our bank account balance, even not the account balance, if they upload your name, your address, your date of birth, your BVN and stuff like that, all those things are PII, they are personal identifiable information. So when they are disclosed in an unauthorized manner, we say that it's a breach. Okay, so that's a breach. So it's important to understand all these terms and understand the difference between them. So that's a breach. So the second one is event. Event is any observable occurrence in a network or system. So events are not necessary. Events can be attack, events can be normal, it can be abnormal. But anything that happens in a network or in a system is an event. For example, if you are trying to log in to your system, right, and you use your password, put your username, you put your password that is correct, is an event. Okay, so that's an event. If you put your password and it's not correct, then it's also an event and it can be classed as an incident. So then when it's now being investigated and then they now see that okay, is the right user that is actually trying to log into that account, then they will say okay, it will still remain an event. Okay, because it's not something that will lead to a that will lead to that will jeopardize the system. It's the actual user that is trying to log in, but he just forget his password. Okay, so then you can discard such event. But the moment an event becomes something that can potentially jeopardize the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a system, it is said to be an incident. So that is now. So event, no problem. Event is you log in, your login is successful. That's an event. But when you log in the first time, you log in the second time, you log in the third time, right? And your system has been set to block anybody that tried to log in more than 3 times with the wrong credentials. So if it's an so for example, if someone is trying to use your credentials now, so it's going to be blocked after the third attempt, right? So that event has now become an incident because it's now a potential account takeover issue, or maybe a password attack. It's now a potential password attack. Okay, and then the first responders will now investigate it. Okay, so that's going to be part of our incident response. So the first responders will now investigate and say, okay, who is this person that is trying to log in? They'll say, okay, it's Tunde. Tunde is trying to log into the system. So why has he used password 3 times and it's not working? So they will now check, is Tunde supposed to work today? So for example, let's say it's a work, it's an office, it's a kind of work where it's a shift work whereby there are some days you work, there are some days that you're not supposed to work. It's your off days. So if that thing happened on your off day, then they will say, okay, it's not supposed to be in the office. So that this is a possible account takeover or password attack event. So it has now become an incident that needs to be investigated. So they will now investigate and say, okay, is he supposed to be office? No. Is he in the office? No. Where is he trying to access it from? Maybe someone is trying to remotely log into the system. So these are the steps that you get to know. So incident is an event that can jeopardize the confidentiality, integrity, or availability. So it can be anything. It can be something that can lead to a denial of service attack. It can be even this recent cable cut that we had, right? Undersea cable cut that affected our telecommunication, whereby our banks, most of the banks services are down, most of the networks are down. That's an incident, right? It's an incident because it has affected availability of service, right? Because we can't use it even though you have data, even though you have airtime, even though you are the owner of your phone, but you still can't have access to it. You can't use it. You can't log into your bank account. You can't make calls. So that's also an incident. Okay, you can't say it's an attack. You can't say it's an exploit. It's just something that happened that nobody have a control over. So another term that we look at is that I've jumped is exploit. So what's exploit? Exploit is it is named exploit because the attacker tries to exploit the system vulnerability. So remember we talked about vulnerabilities in previously, where we say vulnerability is a loophole or weakness in a system that an attacker can take advantage of. So the moment an attacker take advantage of this weakness to have an unauthorized access to an organization system or network, then we'll say that particular vulnerability has been exploited. So that's why we call it exploit. So exploit requires someone to use a vulnerability that exists in the network to have an unauthorized access to the network and then carry out either maybe an attack on confidentiality, an attack on integrity, or an attack on availability, or anyone that cut across them. It can be more than one of these criteria, right? But exploit is when you actually take advantage of an already existing weakness in the system and then you try to use it to attack either the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the network. So that's an exploit. Then the other one we are going to talk about is an intrusion. So an intrusion is a security event or a combination of events that constitute a deliberate security incident in which an intruder gains or attempts to gain access to a system or a system resource without authorization. So this can also be in form of an exploit, right? But the aim of an intrusion is for someone to break into your system, okay, to break into your system, to get access into your system. For example, let's say an hacker now, or an hacker or an attacker tries to get into the network of a bank. Okay, you know an attacker is not authorized, it's not supposed to normally have access to it, but due to a security event or due to some combination of events, because it's usually not something that is straightforward, you may need to do a whole lot of things before you be able to gain access into that. So when the moment you, it's just like, okay, so a typical intrusion. You are in your house, you've locked your door, and someone just force your door to open and come in. Okay, so you call that person an intruder because it's not invited, it's not wanted, and you are not even expecting the person. You have not invited the person, they have not knocked, you have not given them the permission to come in. They just bag into your house forcefully, and then they come and do whatever they want to do. So you call that person an intruder. So it's still the same thing in cybersecurity. So that is usually called an intrusion, right? Yeah. So an intrusion can make use of. So I know you may be wondering what's now the difference between intrusion and exploit. So yes, intrusion will most likely exploit the system because there must be a particular weakness in that particular system that the intruder is going to exploit to now have access into your system, right? So the next one is threat. We've talked about threats and vulnerability previously. So threat is any event or any circumstance or anything with potential to have a negative impact on the organization operation. Okay, so that's a threat. So threat can be a physical threat, it can be someone that wants to break into your building, maybe jump the fence, or maybe you don't have fence. They can come into your building to steal stuffs and stuff like that. Then you can have or for physical threat also it can include maybe if it's a bank, you can say armed robbers are physical threat because they will come in with guns, they will maybe use explosive to break the building and then have access to it. So that's a threat. So technological threats, we have technological threat also. So technological threat can be someone trying to hack your system, or maybe a known weakness, someone trying to hack your system is a threat to you, an attacker trying to. So we've talked about threats extensively in our previous classes, so I don't think we need to waste too much time on it. But threat is just a circumstance or an event with potential to have a negative impact in your organization operation. Okay, so that's a threat. So and also we also have threats. Natural disaster can also be threat, maybe fire, tornado, or even pandemic. All those things can also be threats to your organization. Then vulnerability, which we've talked about also today, is weakness in an information system, a weakness or a loophole which can be taken advantage of, or which can be exploited by a threat source. Okay, so that's vulnerability. And then 0 day. 0 day can be the new term today. Probably we've not talked about 0 day before. So 0 day is a vulnerability that is unknown. Usually vulnerability are known. For example, if you are using maybe a Windows Server or Windows 7 or Windows 10, they will tell you this particular system is vulnerable to this type of attack. So you have to update. There will be a patch for you to update so that you will no longer be vulnerable. You can see day to day. You get to see update release for our Android phones, for our Google Chrome, for different applications of our operating system. So that means that that threat has been known. Sorry, that vulnerability has been known, and then they work on a patch for it, for them for it to be patched. But 0 day vulnerability is a type of vulnerability that is unknown. It's unknown to the threat, it's unknown to the vendor, it's unknown to everybody. It's just discovered and it's being used to exploit the system, or probably not used. In most cases, if the 0 day was detected by so that's why a lot of big companies have what they call the bug hunting program, whereby they encourage people to attack their system, and then when you're able to find a vulnerability that is not known, they give you, then they'll confirm that vulnerability that you have seen, and when they see that that vulnerability actually exists, then they pay you. So those are one of the ways big organizations try to make sure that the good guys discover the 0 day vulnerabilities before the bad guys, because if it's been discovered first by the bad guys, they will exploit it, they'll use it against the company, and the company might not even know that they've been attacked, right? So that is what we call a 0-day vulnerability. All right, so those are the terminologies that we may be coming across, not only in this particular class but till the end of this chapter, because this chapter is more like incident response, business continuity plan, disaster recovery, and stuff like that. So those are what we are going to be talking about mainly in this chapter, and all these things we keep popping up. All right, so what's the goal of incident response? So the goal of incident response, forget all this grammar. The goal of incident response is to be prepared. Right? Is to be prepared so that you will not be caught unaware. Because it's incident are something that in cybersecurity or even in life is something that no matter the precaution you put in ground, okay, it might still happen. So just imagine the one that happened last week. We are unable to even have our class because of it. So just imagine the telecom service provider, they've invested a whole lot of money to lay their cable underground underwater from Europe down to Africa. So it's not something that we only Nigeria is using, right? It's not something that only Nigeria is using. It's something that is being used in this part of the world, Western and Southern Africa. So they invested a whole lot of money to get it done, and then you see what happened. It went off due to some event. We don't even know why. They didn't even tell us. Everything that we know is speculative at best. But what we know is that there was a cable cut. A whole lot of them are affected. But right now, up till now, it has not been fixed 100%. But we can see now that it took only like 2 or 3 days before we start having the type of network that we used to have before. They are not currently operating efficiently because they are still trying to fix the cable. They said it's going to take like 2 to 3 weeks. Some even say it might take up to a month before it's being fixed. But because they have already, even though they know the chances of it happening is very slim, but they have already have an incident response plan in place that, okay, if this thing happens, what do we do? So just imagine that they don't have any backup plan, they don't have anything they can switch to. We'll still be struggling up to today. We'll still be struggling with our network connectivity up to today because they are still fixing that particular those cables that are cut. But because they know that it's a possibility, right? They already prepared against it. So there's no better way to explain incident response than to tell you that it's something that you must do to be prepared for incident. Because no matter what you do, no matter what you put in place in the organization, okay, to avoid problem, it is still inevitable that 1 or 2 ways the problem will still occur. So if it's possible that cybersecurity is 100% guaranteed, right? Most of us will not be in jobs, will not have jobs. Okay, because what companies will just do is buy their firewall, buy their everything, install it, and leave it for it to auto run. Because once you put this thing, it will not happen. But because it's not possible, it can still happen. So that's why they don't only need the tools, but they also need the people, and also the people also need a process. And one of the process that is required is the incident response plan, right? So the priority of any incident response is to protect life, health, and safety. The primary goal, like I said, is to be prepared. So for example, so let's say when you're planning for in the organization, if you are going to plan for all the incident, right? So let's say you are planning for an incident, maybe a fire incident or an earthquake or whatever, right? So the first thing that you know that is very important is to protect life, to make sure that your staffs are not injured, and when they are injured, they receive treatment on time and everyone is safe. That is going to be the priority. Then the next thing is for you to now see, okay, how do we resume our day-to-day activity. So that is what incident response is all about, to be prepared against any incident that occurs. So that's why it's very important. It's a very thorough document. An incident response is part of so this is where I want you to look at. Incident response is part of a business continuity management or a business continuity plan. So it's a subset of it, is part of it, because there's a business continuity plan is a much larger document. That's what we are going to be talking about tomorrow. It's a much larger document which cater for everything. Okay, but incident response now cater for, you are going to identify different type of incidents, and then there's going to be a way on how to respond to those particular incidents when they occur. So for example, if you observe that someone is trying to log into a system which they are not supposed to log into, so what do you do? So the first thing is to block the connection. So the first thing is to block that particular system, maybe after 3 attempts. Then the next thing maybe is for you to investigate, to establish that who is this person. Is it from the actual person or is it from an attacker? So when you establish that it's from an attacker, then you know that, okay, you know that there's a possibility that your system is currently under attack, and then you can now maybe cut off that part. You can now block the account, and then make sure that till when the owner comes, before you can now reset the password. So depending on your processes that you have in place in the organization, that is going to determine how it's going to look like. So the incident response plan is going to contain different procedures, because you remember we talked about procedures the last time, like step to step ways in which you are going to do things. So it's expected to contain different procedure and different standards that are related to the incident response plan. It is also a living representation of an organization incident response policy. So remember, we talk about policy, procedure, standard, framework previously, right? So we've talked about all those things previously. So it's important. So one of the policies that you're expected to have in your organization is an incident response policy. Okay, which is going to be from your incident response plan. So it's when you come up with the plan that you'll now be able to come up with a policy that, okay, if this thing happens, this is what we'll do. If this thing happens, this is what we'll do. And then you give a procedure on how to do those things. So we've talked about all these things previously. So it's also important to take note of your organization visions, your strategy and mission when you are coming up in your incident response plan, because that's what is going to shape it. So for example, if you are an organization, for example, so let's say OPay or MoneyPoint or PalmPay, for example, right? I know most of us use those things. So even though we may not have a clear vision, we may not know what their vision or strategy or mission is, though it should be on their website, but even if we don't know, we know that their main selling point, which is their vision and mission, is that they give us fast services, they give us high availability. If other banks are having challenge, these 3 fintechs will most likely be working, no matter how bad it is. Even when we had that downtime, even during the cash crunch, these 3 guys are still working efficiently, like they are working as if nothing is happening. So which means one of their strategic mission, or one of their key points in the organization, is to make sure that there is high availability. So if such organization is trying to implement an incident response, right? So you understand that even when they have a technical issue or when they have a problem, right, the first thing they want to take care of is to make sure that people can transact no matter what, because that is their selling point, that is their strategy, right? So that is why it's important to understand the organization vision and strategy, so that when you are making your plan, you know what is important, then you know what you can do later. So procedure to implement the plan should define the technical process, the techniques, the checklist, and other tools that the team will need when responding to an incident. So if you have to take note, so let's stick with an incident, for example, now, so that we'll have a clear picture. So incidents can be up to more than 100, can be more than 100, right? But so that we have a clear direction. So let's stick to one. So for example, in the event of a ransomware attack, okay, so let's say in the event of a ransomware attack. So for those of us that don't know what a ransomware is, so ransomware is a type of attack that if your organization fall victims to it, all your data, all your information is going to be encrypted. You have nothing to work with, not until you pay the attacker. They'll give you a key or like a password for you to decrypt your information before you can have access to it, and then your business process will now continue. So they hold you to ransom. It's just like someone kidnapping you or someone kidnapping someone and then they call you to make payment. So it's the same thing. So they kidnap your data and they ask you for ransom, for you to pay ransom. So that's why they call this ransomware. So the way they kidnap your data is that they encrypt it, right? They encrypt it. You will not have access to it. It will become useless to you. So I think like 2 or 3 years ago, one of the major bet company, which I'm not going to mention their name, had that challenge, and they were offline for like 3 or 4 days before they were able to come back online. So let's stick with that. So let's say it's a ransomware attack. So if you are trying to design an incident response plan for a ransomware attack, you have to define the technical process and say, okay, so how do we mitigate it, or how do we prevent it, or it has happened, how do we recover from it? So what organizations do now is that they have backups. Okay, so ransomware make it important for people to have your backup. So depending on how serious your organization is, will determine the type of backup you are using. You can use a live backup or a mirrored site, as the case may be, whereby all your data, the same way it's appearing in your main database, is being replicated in another database somewhere, which is not linked to your current database. And then if there's an issue, you recover from that particular one, right? So that's one of the technical process. So that's a technical process, right? You have a backup. So then the techniques is like the way you are going to do it, right? So how do you do the recovery? So which platform? Is it on AWS? Is it on Amazon? What are the steps that you are going to take? Then what are the checklists? What do you need to do when it happens? So there's going to be a checklist. So the first thing is isolate the data. So there's a checklist. We are still going to go through the process of incident response. Okay, it's part of what we're going to talk about today. But the main thing is that you are going to identify the technical processes that you need to do. You are going to identify the techniques. Techniques is how you are going to do it. Checklist is going to be what you are going to do. It's going to be like a serial. You do this one first, you do this one next, you do this one next, you do this one next, and then you finish by doing this one. And then what are the tools that your team need to respond to that particular incident? So to prepare for incident, there are common components in which you should find in your incident response plan. There are about 4 of them, and we are going to talk about each of those components. So the first one is preparation, right? If you are coming up with your incident response plan, the first thing you need to do is to prepare, right? So that's what you're going to do. So that's the whole aim of the incident response plan, for you to be able to prepare. So under the preparation, that's where you're going to develop a policy, your incident response policy, which is going to be approved by the management, right? So you get a management support, and then you design a policy which is going to be approved by management. So the next thing is to identify your critical data system and single point of failures. So you identify all your critical system. So for example, for a bank, what are their critical system? Their main server, their database where customer information are stored, the core banking application which they used for your debiting, crediting, and stuff like that, the software that is controlling the ATM, right? The software they use for the portal where you carry out your internet banking, right? The portal where the application, your mobile bank application, right? So those are the critical systems in that in a particular bank. So you identify them, then you identify a single point of failure. So if this one thing goes down, we will not have service again. For example, when there was a cable cut, maybe the bank is using let's say ISP A as their service provider, right? They are using one particular ISP, internet service provider A, as their service provider. If that service provider is having issue, it's going to cause a single point of failure to the organization. So they can now say, okay, let's make sure that, okay, our head office is having 2 or 3 ISPs, then others can have 2. So when this particular one is off, to avoid a single point of failure, we'll switch to this one, right? So a single point of failure means that anything that, once that thing is affected, the whole organization is going to be affected. So that can be their main ISP, it can be their data center where they store customer data. So that can also be a single point of failure. So they identify all those things. So it's going to be part of the incident response plan. So the other thing is that they train staff on incident response. So when the plan is ready, you train staffs on incident response so that everyone will know what to do when an incident happens. So in the case of maybe a password, a phishing attack, a fire incident, there's a bomb scare, whatever incident that you plan for, you must train staffs on how to respond. Because if you have the plan and you don't train them, when it happens, everyone will be confused, right? So you have to train your staffs on the incident response. So the next thing is to implement an incident response team. So you need to have a team which is going to be in charge of incident response, which we are going to talk about. Then you practice incident identification. So that's going to be part of your training or drills. There's something we call drills. So for you to be able to identify all those incidents when they come, and then for the team that are going to be in charge to know their first response, what they need to do, right? So the next one, which is going to take us to the next one, you identify roles and responsibility. So once the incident has been identified, who do what when? So that is when you identify the roles and responsibility for those incidents. Then you plan the coordination of communication between stakeholders. So if it's an incident, if you need to inform your customers, like we were informed when this thing happened, they've tried and see that, okay, this is something we cannot solve in maybe 1 hour or 2 hours or 6 hours, depending on the organization. But different organizations have different plans. But you will get to see that almost all our banks sent us an email telling us, or maybe they send us text message telling us what the problem is. Almost all our telcos send us a text message because we are stakeholders. We use their service, right? So, but before we know, there are people that will know immediately. So for example, when they discover that, probably the people that discover it will immediately inform the CISO. For example, I'm just saying, the CISO will inform most likely the MD CEO, who will now say, okay, so they will now see how they can plan and see how they can move to or find alternative. Okay, before they now say, okay, the PR team should reach out to the customers. So these are going to be part of the plans, right? Before we know, they've escalated it to maybe the people on the field and stuff like that. So all those things have to be clear in the incident response plan. Then the other thing is to consider the possibility that if the primary method of communication did not work, then you have to have an alternative to communicate, because the most important thing when an incident occurred is to communicate. You have to communicate because it's not something someone can do. It's a teamwork, and most likely your team may not even be in the same place. So you have to communicate. You have to make sure that whatever they need to get that incident resolved is within their is within their power. So that's that about that. So the next one we are going to talk about after preparation is detection and analysis. So you have prepared, you have trained your staff, everybody is ready, you know what to do, you know who to call, the plan is there, you have trained them, everybody knows what to do. So the next step is detection and analysis. So when this thing happens, right, you have to, before you know if you're going to have, you have to monitor all your possible attack vectors. So that is why organizations now have what we call, some organizations now have SOC, some have CM, and other stuff like that. SOC is known as a Security Operations Center. Security Operations Center in the sense that all your possible attack vectors, all your assets that you have identified in preparation. Remember we said identify all your critical data and system. So all those things that you have identified are going to be your possible attack vectors, because all your you can be attacked on any of your assets. So you have to monitor them, right? So that's why organizations now have SOC. And part of the SOC works, one of the main responsibility of the SOC is to respond to incident. So they monitor so that you will not miss anything. They keep monitoring everything, because whatever happens on the system is logged. And but because you may not need to, so just like I said before, we have events, we have incident. So you must have filtered it not to show you events, because when you show events, you are going to be over. That means you have to be investigating everything. So that's when you have to now create your baseline for incidents. So maybe if someone log in 1, 2, it can be classed as an event. You may not see it. But once they log in the third time with the wrong password, it became an incident immediately. Then your incident response team are going to see it. Then they are going to pick it up. Then they are going to analyze the incident using known data and threat intelligence. Known data in the sense that information that you have access to previously, and then we call something threat intelligence in cybersecurity. That's also another aspect of cybersecurity entirely. So threat intelligence, just like intelligence, just like the conventional intelligence. You know, we have intelligence agency in the country whereby they carry out, they look for groups that are planning attack. So the same thing happens in the cyber world. We have people that plot on how to carry out some exploits. We have people that discuss vulnerabilities that have been discovered. So threat intelligence allows you to gather information on known threats, okay, and then you will now be able to, or maybe incident that has happened. So if a bank, for example, if bank A has been attacked using this method, right? So you get to know that, okay, bank A has been attacked using this method. Then you check your system and see, are we also vulnerable to this? You say yes. Okay, then before you are attacked, you do what? You already provide, so you already mitigate, or you have already provided patches to those things that bank A were vulnerable to, for them to be attacked. So that is threat intelligence. So that's just typically what threat intelligence means. You understand what has happened previously, you use it to improve your system, or you gather current, you look for information on current trends, for you to now be able to protect your organization. So it's mostly it's a topic on its own entirely. So there are different sources that you get those intelligence from the dark web, from feeds, from vendors, from fellow people, from fellow organizations that you are in the same line of business. So there are different sources for those feeds. So it's actually another field. It's one of the aspects, it's one of the areas of specialization in cybersecurity. Then the next one is to prioritize the incident response. So when, for example, if someone is trying to break into attack an account of your CEO, and someone is trying to ping your system, for example, someone is trying to gather information about your organization, and someone is trying to hack into your CEO or CFO's account. You have to prioritize. You have to know which one your team is to respond to first, or which one you have to respond to within 5 minutes, which one you have to respond to within 30 minutes, which one you can leave for 2 hours, for example. I'm not saying they are not important. I'm not saying you don't have to attend to all of them, but you have to set SLAs. You have to prioritize, because all these things, especially in a large organization, all these things happen frequently. You get to see them frequently, maybe 10 or sometimes up to 100 incidents in a day, depending on what is happening at that particular point. And then you have to make sure you attend to all of them. Then you standardize an incident documentation. So whatever incident you come through, you make sure that it's being documented. Whatever steps you take to detect and analyze this is being documented, so that when it happens again and you are not there, someone else will be able to do what you have done, and then they don't have to start from zero. So that's that. Then the next thing after you have detect and analyze the incident is to contain. You have to contain the incident, right? So after you have seen that is an incident, you have investigated, you have seen that it's a threat. For example, maybe it's a ransomware attack. So the first thing you do is to gather evidence. You look at the evidence, the IP address that the attack is originating from, the IP address of the employee that interacted with that particular, or maybe the vulnerability, the system that the attacker break into. You gather all the evidence, how he did it, what he did, how he moved from system A to system B, how he copied your information, how he sent them out, how the attacker encrypted your information. So you gather all those evidence. Then you choose an appropriate containment strategy. So for example, if it's a virus or if it's a malware, the containment strategy that you are expected to do is to isolate the system, right? So that it doesn't spread to other system. Then you isolate it, then you can carry out your investigation. If you're able to clean the infection, then you can now bring the system back to the network. So that's an example. Then you identify the attacker. So I've mentioned these last two parts in my explanation. So because it's important for you to identify the attacker. That's the only way you'll be able to stop the attack. If you don't identify the attacker, there's no way you'll be able to isolate or cut the attack off. So that's what containment is all about. And then the next one is post-incident analysis. So after you are done containing the attack, you've isolated the system, you've continued business as usual. So the main thing you need to do now is that you from all the evidence you've gathered, the ones that you need to retain, maybe as an indicator of compromise, probably the IP address of the attacker, the IP address of the systems that are attacked, and all those things that are actually very related to the attack. You may need to retain them so that so that you can say, okay, if any traffic is coming from this social IP address, you can block it. So you use it to improve your system. So the next thing is that you document your lesson learned. So lesson learned is you document lesson learned. Why documenting lesson learned is important is because for every incident there must be a lesson learned. So maybe there is a patch which you are supposed to update and you have not done it, or maybe there's a patch you miss, you don't even know that there's a vulnerability, or for example, it's a zero-day vulnerability and they have now stolen your information. So the only thing you have to do now is that you need to use lesson learned. Okay, so how do we avoid this? So maybe you can now suggest to the management, okay, let's also do a bug hunting program so that we can give people permission to subject. So and bug hunting, what they do is that they don't just tell people to attack all their system. No, there is a scope. They say, okay, attack this one, don't attack this one, attack this one, don't attack this one. So you can now say, okay, you can open some of your system to the bug hunting program, and then you say, okay, let people try to help us find bugs in our infrastructure. So that can be your lesson learned. Or your lesson learned can be that maybe you did not set, maybe after 3 trial, you didn't tell you didn't set your system to block someone from trying to log in, and someone now try to log in for up to 10 times and they eventually get in and steal customers' information, or maybe they are able to cause damage in your network. So when you have gathered your evidence, you'll be able to now come up and say, okay, so this is the problem we observed, then this is the solution. Let's say, okay, after 2 or 3 trials, then you block the person from accessing. So when you have done everything that you're supposed to do within the incident response process, you're documenting your lesson learned is not going to be something difficult, right? So that is what this particular point is talking about. So incident response plan team. So you need to come up with a team, right? So organizations that have a security operations center, which I said earlier, need a suitable incident response team, and it can be a probably staffed, and you can have a dedicated a dedicated team trained for incident response, right? Which you can leverage on, or rather you can combine it. You can use your normal staffs and say, okay, when an incident occurs, you are going to be the ones to be the responders to those particular incidents. So depending on how large the organization is, the number of employees you have, the number of facility you have, and stuff like that. So that's what's going to determine the type of incident response team. So it's going to be dependent on your requirements as an organization. So you can have a dedicated team, and you can have people that do other things, but they will know that once an incident occurs, they will be the set of people to respond to it. So incident response, just like I said previously, are like medical first responders. They have the skill to provide medical assistance at accident scene. So the same way, IT professionals that are going to be incident responders, they need specific training. So for example, if someone is going to be working as a first medical responder, that means the person must be able to know how to do CPR. The person must be able to know how to administer first aid. The person must be able to know how to move a patient that is injured, right? So the same thing applies for incident responders. So there's a certain training they need. There's a specific training that you need to train them on, so that they'll be able to identify which one is an incident, which one is an event, and then they will now be able to troubleshoot a typical security incident, and then if it's something they can resolve, they resolve it, and if it's something that needs to be reported to an higher level, maybe some analyst, for them to now be able to remediate it, then they will report it, and then they will continue their own work. So which means they are done. So just like if you have administered your CPR, you have administered first aid, you can now transport the patient to the hospital, and then you give it to the doctors, and then you take it up from there. So the same thing applies here. If it's something you can take care of, or if it's something you can manage, then you now report it, and then it's going to be remediated by the SOC team. So team members, just like I said, they have to have trainings on these things. They need to have because they need to assist with investigating the incident, assessing the damage, collect evidence, report the incident, and all those things. So they need to be trained on those things. So many organizations now have what we have a team that handle these things. So they call them Computer Incident Response Team, SAT, or maybe Computer Security Incident Response Team. So they are mostly part of the SOC. They are the ones that when an incident occurs, they respond to it, and they have 4 primary responsibilities. They determine the amount and scope of damage done by the incident. First one. The second one is they determine whether confidential information was compromised during the incident. Then they implement any necessary recovery procedure to restore security and recover from the incident-related damage. And then they supervise the implementation of any additional security measures necessary to improve security and prevent the occurrence of the incident. So that's the same thing we'll be talking about. So they determine the amount of damage that has been done. They determine whether a confidential information has been compromised during the incident. So they check if this has happened. Then once they are able to identify the damage and assess the damage, they implement the necessary recovery procedures to recover from those damage, and then they make sure that they supervise the implementation of. So after they have recovered, then if there is something you need to now do to prevent a reoccurrence, they also make sure that they supervise it and they add it. So we have a in Nigeria, we have what we call the NG-SAT, which is which should be doing this on a national level, though they are trying, but they can still do more. The NG-SAT is currently domiciled at the Office of the National Security Advisor. It's supposed to be under the National Coordinator of Cybersecurity in the country. So, but we don't have that yet. But we have NG-SAT actually. It's under they have a website. I can share the link. So if there's any incident, it's expected, or if there's any cybersecurity incident, it's expected to report it to NG-SAT, and then they are also expected to investigate it and provide solution to you. So just like I said, they are there, they are trying, but they can still do more. So if you don't know we have something like this, so now you know. We have NG-SAT in the country, and this is what they do. They respond to cybersecurity incident. But the problem is that because for example, banks may not want to call NG-SAT to do this, or maybe some companies will not like to report to NG-SAT that they've been. So they also have their own internal SAT team that manage it. But actually, by law, you are expected to report any cybersecurity incident that occurred in the country to NG-SAT. So that is the law according to the Nigeria Cybersecurity Act. Okay, so that is the last slide, and then if you have any question, then we can take our questions before we call it a day on incident response. So thank you all for listening, and